Hello everybody. I would really like to title this video Communism, Hierarchy, and the Sons of God. Okay, so when we look at the Bible and we see how God really set up the promised land, which was really, really wonderful, there was a king and there was a priest. Well, in the beginning, of course, it wasn't quite like that. Every single man was a king and did what was right in his own eyes, and there were judges that really helped the people govern. In the very beginning, of course, every single person in the tribe of Israel was allotted an inheritance. That means everybody got something. Nobody was left out. And you could definitely see that there was prosperity for everybody. And those who had gotten their inheritance first was commanded to help the others to receive their inheritance as soon as they got theirs. So nobody was supposed to be left behind or left out of their inheritance. And it was a real command that everybody should help everybody else to receive their particular inheritance. Now, of course, eventually they really wanted a king. So then there was a king, there was a priest, and there were people. And that did cause some problems or a lot less freedom for the people. But still, even when you look at David or even when you look at Saul, there were definitely perks to having a king. Saul definitely, he definitely did some battles. He did a lot of good things too before corruption basically started to twist him. But then we also see with King David that even when he was king, his people were quite happy and prosperous. And while there was still some power struggles within the kingdom, things were still pretty good. But then we really, really see that underneath King Solomon, that while they were probably pretty tired since they were complaining about being overworked, there was a huge time of prosperity. Everyone was prosperous. They spoke about how silver was nothing in the time of Solomon. So even with a king, you could definitely see a very happy, very prosperous people. And we also see how God really intends for everybody to basically to have an inheritance and to have a spiritual inheritance. There's enough for everybody. King David wouldn't need Nathan the prophet's office because he had his, and his was really truly special, and his was enough. And Nathan the prophet wouldn't need to steal King David's because he had enough. And all of the people really truly have enough. There is enough for everybody. So when we look at modern day societies and governments, we're seeing a few hiccups. And this is something that I really wanted to break down and speak about. Communism, wherever it's practiced, is defined by quite a few different things. And the really official sort of school book definitions are something that is very interesting for people to look up to, but that's not necessarily what I'm going to bring up. Of course, communism is about equality between genders, equality to where there is no hierarchy whatsoever. And they basically try to make everybody the owner of everything. So right there we see where communism breaks away from God's plan that everybody should have a spiritual inheritance and the ability to basically inherit wealth through the generations and be able to inherit office and all kinds of different things. Spiritual inheritance is very important. So when you look at communism and their desire from the outside to make everything equal, basically what they're saying is that there is no real reward for righteousness and there is no real penalty for living wickedly. Everybody should have exactly what everybody else has and the same opportunities and the same rights, which basically completely wipes away the incentive for righteous living. Because of course, if you are in a difficult marriage, and it's a difficult marriage, it's not an easy marriage, You could do the easy thing and run off and find somebody who is easier and plays up to you a lot more. Or you could think, hey, I want to make sure that my children have both parents, and so I'm going to stick it out with this very difficult spouse, even if it was just for my children, for future generations, so that they might be able to have a better life than even what I had. So we see that the righteous, the way that they think is long term. It's not short term, it's long term. The wicked, on the other hand, think about the temporary pleasure and the avoidance of pain on any kind of level whatsoever. And so they're not really concerned about the next generation. They're only concerned about how they have it. So communism in the fight for equality is basically a complete defiance against any kind of real righteous reward that God might give. So we see that. We see a rebellion against hierarchy and against authority within a communist structure. And we see a penalty for inheritance. In North Korea, there have been those who have said that there are people who are in concentration camps with no hope to ever being free because their parents had been landowners generations ago. And even if they didn't own any land to this day, they're still being punished for the crime of having been a landowner, of being a success of some kind. So this is a very, very strange and tragic thing that comes with communism. But when we're looking at the problems with hierarchy, because communism is really what you could say comes from abuse of hierarchy. And when we look at those places that became communist, we can definitely see a lot of different factors. I think Russia is one of the better examples because we saw the Romanovs, who were basically in charge of Russia for many, many years. And you could definitely say that they were special. You know, they came from a special family. They came from, I really have a lot of respect for the royal family. I really have a lot of respect for Queen Elizabeth. I think she's a great, great leader. I have a lot of respect for the European royal family. I'm not suggesting that they are perfect, but I really, truly believe that they are special to people and special to their countries, and they provide a real true service. So when you look at the Romanovs and the whole history of Russia, you can definitely see that there is a very combative nature. I brought that up in my Ivan the Terrible video, that there's a weird combative nature between Russia, their leaders, their priests, and their people. So, and they almost seem to get a joy out of bringing pain to each other. They're just picking on each other all the time. And the people are just as brutal as the leaders. I mean, for as brutal as we want to make the leaders of Russia, the people, really, the Russian people have been very, very hard on their leaders. So, we can definitely see that. That being said, when we look at Russia, we see that there was an established hierarchy with the royal family in Russia. We definitely see in the Romanovs that they were kind of on the top of this hierarchy. Now, when the stars of God basically become corrupt and ambitious, and the more ambitious they become and the less willing they are to accept pain, the less they're willing to accept the sovereignty of God, the less they're willing to accept the judgment of God, they unfortunately become more and more inclined to hold people back in order to hold authority in their own hands without sharing it with anybody else. And that increases corruption, that takes away wisdom, because there are people in every single society that God has gifted with tremendous knowledge and wisdom and skill and understanding. And if those people are never able to reach their spiritual inheritance or able to make it to the place that God has called them to be because the people are unworthy and are constantly tearing them down, then that society is ripped off. they never actually get the benefit of those things. So when you're looking at a hierarchy, or even in the time of Jesus, Jesus wasn't out and out going after the religious leaders. He was not going after Rome. He was merely lifting up those who were on the very bottom. And because of that, the people on top, who would have still been in power, they just might have had to be a little bit more accountable with their power, or they might have had to be a bit more respectful or a bit more considerate with funds and so on. They didn't like it. So they killed Jesus for that particular reason. So we see that even in the stars of God, even in the special people of God, or the rulers or the leadership, that as they are able to grab a hold of more and more power and hold more and more people back, then what you end up doing is you end up creating a hatred for hierarchy, which eventually leads to sort of more communistic thinking. And we see that as well in regards to men and women. Men who are given a very special place in God, who is considered sort of the glory or the image of God. And, they are supposed to display the kind of leadership and authority that Jesus Christ does. But if they become corrupt and they have too much power in their hands, and they are unable to recognize the sovereignty of women or the authority of women, then they become more and more tyrannical, less and less like Jesus Christ, and women respond by wanting to take down the patriarchy. Let's take down the patriarchy. And that is because they have seen the corruption of the patriarchy, and they feel that the solution and the key to their freedom is actually the takedown of the stars of God, the leaders of God, the ministers of God, those who hold the flame of God in their hearts and in their hands. And that is when society starts to really go after the sons of God. So you could say that when a star or a leader of God really truly starts to try to hold back the people that could hold them accountable or bring judgment into their own life. Once again, we go right back to a minister who has to deal with the fact that you could lift somebody up who just tears you down the next second. We really, really have to understand that by accepting that judgment, that sting keeps us from the ultimate judgment, which would be, once again, where, it's not just a loss of power, but we see with communism that people are really, really, truly out and out going to smash all the different kinds of hierarchy that there is. But hierarchy is not bad. Hierarchy and leadership and authority creates safety, and it preserves lives, and it protects if it is functioning properly. But even the most corrupt authority is better than no authority. But still, we definitely see where accepting those small tastes of judgment not only can propel us to high places of leadership, but it also keeps us from the ultimate judgment. And when I think of the ultimate judgment, I can definitely think of the Romanov family, which I don't think what happened to them was right. I'm probably going to talk about that maybe in my next video. But you could definitely say that if the Romanovs were really truly guilty of holding people back, and eventually the people got tired of it and took them down, if that was really truly the case, then you could see where by not accepting the judgment that would come from lifting up somebody and then them stabbing you in the back, it ended up in their ultimate downfall and the slaughter of their entire house. So this is very, very important.